As we go deeper into choosing an intervention model, we find that there are three prevailing models currently in use in many schools across the country. These models are intervention hour, or flooding, elective hour, or integrated core interventions. The intervention hour model has the highest degree of flexibility for students to receive intervention. The flexibility is anchored within a master schedule that allows common time in the day where intervention enrichment opportunities are available for all students. This model is frequently utilized in elementary and middle level schools. A nice benefit to this model is that it is easily adapted to new issues and new instructional developments. So one of the greatest things about this model is that if you have students that need intervention, but you also have groups of students that need maybe enrichment activities, which we seldomly can incorporate into our schedules, it can happen because all teachers are on deck supporting interventions during this time. If you notice the schedule on the right, all teachers are teaching an intervention period. Now this intervention period can vary in time and length. Really depends on the type of interventions that your school chooses to use. But because all teachers are teaching an intervention, it's really easy to place kids into the schedule. It's also really easy to maybe have some class sizes larger than others. So if you have some more higher functioning students in comprehension, then maybe their class sizes could be larger than maybe an intensive intervention for students that are really far behind. But the beauty of this schedule is it doesn't impact what other courses the students may have because they're getting their intervention. Now, with this schedule, you would have to double check your contractual obligations for prep time and so on. But most cases, principals have been able to make this work with staff, especially if they're able to really make the case for staff that if we provide intervention time outside of the core, then they're not responsible for doing so many interventions or differentiated instruction within their core. So it's really a win-win. I've been fortunate to have been in many classes across the state of Michigan and abroad, and one of the stories I commonly hear from principals is that when they identify interventions or an intervention strategy, they then train their teachers in the intervention strategy, and they of course instruct intervention courses within this intervention hour model. But what they see is a teacher that uses these strategies in intervention hour take these strategies into all of their courses, because most of the time these intervention strategies are just really good teaching practices. So there's this added benefit of including many teachers in the training for interventions and many teachers in the instruction of interventions. The next model is the elective hour structure. With the elective hour, it's very common in middle and high schools. Using the elective hour as an option, it requires little impact on the master schedule, since courses that focus on interventions can be incorporated to the regular elective schedules that schools normally already have. Now, the challenge with elective interventions is the same with any elective. You'll have students that are in different activities, say band or special education or other programs, that have that course taking place during the same time that you've been able to carve out time for an intervention. So we've always had this issue. Sometimes, say, a band student who's also a choir student has to choose one or the other. Well, this doesn't really work for us for interventions. If students really need interventions for their core subject areas, but they're in band and they can't take it, that's one of the difficulties of the elective hour. Now, if you can work through those, then you have a very powerful schedule. But that's just one of the hiccups that you have when this happens. And of course, not only the student, if you do choose an elective hour and you have to remove an elective from them so they can be in intervention, you'll have a little pushback from students, but you'll also have the potential to have pushback from parents as well. And so that's something to be prepared to have. As you entertain which schedules to look at, you may look at where the students are testing and decide that most of them are testing outside of a conflicted area, and so you decide to go forward with the elective hour. The next is a fairly difficult one to administer as an administrator, because when teachers go into their classrooms and they shut their doors, it's really hard to tell what's actually happening. It's also hard for them to ask for some support because there's a blurred line sometimes between the actual intervention and their actual core teaching. So in the integrated core intervention model, you're essentially trying to integrate the interventions into that core time that you've set aside for, say, reading or for math. Generally, we're thinking of this within a 90-minute block, or in some type of block schedule, there's an extended period of time where the teacher is teaching the core. So for example, if you had a 55-minute math course, it would be very difficult to do an integrated core, because essentially what you're doing at integrated core is you're providing the interventions to specific students while other students are engaging in other activities. So integrated core interventions can be effective, and the nice thing is there's a relationship that already exists with that particular classroom teacher. But again, it's hard to administer, and it's hard to do outside of having some type of block of time for those courses. With the integrated core, you're really trying to accomplish a lot of different things within the same class period. If you think of it as like a station format, like you might see in an elementary school, it might be a little easier to wrap your head around what's taking place in class. A teacher would structure a given part of the time outside of what they are teaching for Tier 1 core that all students are receiving, time for maybe enrichment activities for students that are doing really well, to activities for interventions for students that are not doing so well, and then maybe one-on-one interaction for the students that are very far behind the rest of the students. So you've probably noticed we're getting deeper and deeper into actual implementation of MTSS and working through some of these issues that will be necessary to have a robust system, because we've identified potential issues with our student population based on where their distribution is towards proficiency. Then we identify what types of activities or interventions would help support students that have those deficiencies. And now we're thinking about what structures that we would need to put in place within our master schedule to be able to facilitate the instructional piece of these interventions. So consider the next following questions as you really try to reach deeper and deeper into the nuances that it's going to take to implement MTSS. These three questions are: what intervention structures best fit the needs of your students? So if you have an enormous amount of students that need interventions, obviously you're going to have to go to some kind of flooding model, because you're never going to be able to run that many students through an elective hour or even an integrated hour. Then, do you have the climate and culture with your staff to implement what you need, or will you have to work on that before moving into a new model? So only certain staff would be ready for everyone to teach an intervention, because you can already guess initially you're going to have pushback from teachers that have never taught in that type of setting. You may have science and social studies teachers that say, well, I really don't know a lot about fluency, or I really don't know how I would instruct comprehension or math fluency or so on. And so you have to think about, do you have a staff that's really open to change and open to trying new things? Because most of these strategies are so scripted or so easy that you really don't have to have a really deep background. Plus, we can always consider, giving maybe the teachers that aren't as talented or have the background in those type of strategies to teach maybe the enrichment pieces within that schedule. And the last question is, if you had to do something to support students immediately, what could you do until you have built the capacity to have a more robust intervention structure? So in other words, if you don't think you have the culture or the climate to be able to start a flooding model right away, then start with a couple intervention courses, because at least students are getting some support. And of course, those experiences are positive experiences with the teachers that are teaching those intervention courses may spread to other teachers when they see the results that those classes are getting. So you have to start somewhere, because every kid's going to need some type of support, and you have to be able to read where your staff is at. And if they're not ready, then start with something small and try to grow it.